Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to the Oraculos podcast, where I bring you ancient wisdom for the modern mystic. I'm your host, Mychal A. Bryan, and joining me today, all the way from Seattle, is Ms. Laura Nalbandian. Laura, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for inviting me, Michael. It's my pleasure to be here.
Well, Laura, I cannot wait to dive into the amazing conversation that we're going to be having today. But before we get there, for those of you who this is your first time joining us here on the Oraculos podcast, this is a podcast where I bring you interviews from astrologers from all around the world who aren't just changing their own lives through their astrological practice, but they're also actively impacting this wider field of astrology that we all know and love. So if you want to continue to be a part of the magic and the momentum that we're building here on the Oraculos podcast, do yourself a favor, go down below, subscribe to the podcast, whether it's here on YouTube, on Apple Podcasts, on Anchor, on Stitcher, or wherever you find us on the internet, as well as like this amazing video and also share this amazing interview with your other astrologically and magically minded friends, because more and more people need to know about these amazing conversations that we're having with these amazing astrologers from around the world. So, Laura, once again, I'm super excited to have you here because of so many things. I was interviewed by you just a week ago on the NORWAC YouTube channel, and now you're in the seat of the interviewee. So it's amazing. It's great. I love it.
Good. I'm ready.
Awesome sauce. Now, Laura, the first time you and I met, and I was telling you this last week when you interviewed me, and if you haven't checked out the NORWAC YouTube page already, please do go and check it out, because I saw that you had Judith Hill on there, you had me, and you've had this entire cadre of amazing astrologers who are going to be presenting at NORWAC 2021.
Right. And I had somebody else do them last year because we were converting. We had a very short window to convert from an in-person conference to a virtual conference. We had just about 6 weeks. So I was so focused on the website and getting it all ready to go that Nicholas Polomonakos did the interviews last year. He kept hounding me to do them. I'm like, I can't. So please do them for me. So he did. And this year I decided, well, I've done broadcasting before. I can do this, so I'll do it. And so I've been squeezing them into my schedule, and they've been a lot of fun. So awesome.
Well, I definitely enjoy being interviewed by you. And once again, everyone, I'm going to post the link to that interview down below so that you can go and check out my amazing interview with Laura Nalbandian about my upcoming talk at NORWAC.
Yes.
So do go and check it out. Now, Laura, the first time you and I met was at UAC. And like I was telling you last week, I saw you at UAC. I saw you doing all of this stuff. And I was thinking to myself, oh my God, who is the organizer of this event? And why do they have this lady working so hard? And then I realized that you were the organizer of the event, which made complete sense because UAC was completely an unbelievable event. And, definitely kudos to you for putting that on in 2018 back in Chicago, because so many people were there. I made so many amazing contacts at UAC, and it wouldn't have been possible if it weren't for the efforts that you and your team put into making that happen.
It was a big team. And of course, the sponsoring organizations, AFAN, ESAR, and NCGR are the major sponsors. They had two junior sponsors, AFA and one of the Vedic schools here in the United States. And so they were the financial sponsors, and they hired me to put on it's called United Astrology Conference. It started in 1986 and would go every 3 years. Then it was every 4 years, and then it would be sometimes 6 years, and then back to 4. And I coordinated my first UAC in the 2002, and then did 2018, and was involved in some of the other ones. It takes about 2 years to coordinate that event. And this last one had a team of about 30 people minimum that we were all working our little fingers to the bones to put that event together and make it as special as it was. And it was the largest UAC they'd ever had. It was around 1,400 plus. Well, it was over 1,400 people.
Wow.
Speakers and such. So.
Wow. Absolutely incredible. And I know that you, Laura, have another very incredible part of your story, which is that you come from a family of astrologers. And I'm so excited to hear about that. So please, Laura, tell our listeners and viewers a lot about yourself and how it is you came into astrology today.
Well, the story goes that in 1965, I was 6 years old. 1965, my mother's dearest friend started studying astrology, and my mother thought it was superstitious hogwash. And my mother is a smart enough woman, and for those of you who don't know, my mother has passed, but I like to speak of her in the present tense because she is and always will be who she is. So she, being the type of woman that she is, knew that she could not dissuade her friend from her folly if she did not know what she was talking about. So she started studying astrology only to dissuade and disprove her friend. And the more she read and the more she studied, the more she could not. So it started a lifelong passion for her. And in probably about 1974, she started really thinking about creating an astrological metaphysical bookstore. In 1975, she opened Astrology at All Books and ended up overall having like 1,200 titles in astrology and even more titles in metaphysics, spirituality, you name it, we had it, gifts and all. And she started teaching classes. Jeffrey Green came into our bookstore in 1976. He started teaching. I worked in the bookstore. I started working in the bookstore when I was 16, after school and during summers. And I wasn't particularly interested in astrology, but I wasn't against it either. It was just something Mom did and had always done. And I think I took my first class at 16, but it was math, which frankly I'm really good at, but I don't know, if you're going to capture somebody's imagination and interest, starting with math is really not the way to go. So I worked in the bookstore off and on until I think it was probably 1979. I was 20, and my father and my mother ran the bookstore. And my father, they must have been talking because my father came to me and told me I was fired from the bookstore. And I was like, why are you firing me? And he said, well, you need to figure out what you're doing with your life. And as long as you stay here in this comfortable place, you'll never do it. So get out, go. So I got odd jobs and eventually ended up working in an accounting firm as a bookkeeper. And I got married, and the plan was my husband would go to college, which he was. And after he graduated, we would have children. Well, that plan failed and we had children sooner. And I realized I didn't want to leave my child at a daycare. So I left the accounting firm and went to work back at the bookstore and took my daughter to work with me. So my mother had her granddaughter every day. And I realized quite quickly, she offered me the job as manager of the bookstore. And I realized quite quickly that in order to work in a metaphysical astrological bookstore, particularly in the astrology section, I would need to know something about the books. I would need to know, somebody was going to come in and ask me a very targeted question about a book. Where would I find a book on progressions? I got to know what a progression is. And maybe I need to know a little bit more about the topic so I could converse intelligently. So I started taking classes. This would have been 1983. I was 24 years old. I took my first real class, and promptly quit. It was harder than I thought it was going to be. I'm a very linear left brain, bookkeeping, analytical, type of thinker. And this more creative visual thing was a real struggle for me. So Mom was very encouraging, and she said, well, yeah, it's hard, but if you think you want to go back, I really encourage that. So I went back again and started taking the classes again, got a little further and promptly quit. So it took about 3 times, and on the third or fourth time, I can't remember, I think it was 3, something caught in my brain, something clicked, something magical happened in there, and I became obsessed with the topic. And of course, I had a wealth of books at my fingertips. Jeffrey Green was my teacher, Mom, my secondary teacher, and lots of fabulous astrologers coming through the bookstore that Mom knew on the astrology lecture circuit. So all the resources were there. Mom's natal Jupiter, her Jupiter is conjunct my sun almost exactly. And I have a pretty tight Jupiter Sun sextile natally as well. So the gift of knowledge did come to me for astrology. I had no intention, Mychal, of being an astrologer. You know, with Jeffrey Green in the bookstore, other astrologers, competent people, I wasn't even 30 yet. I really, as a Capricorn, didn't feel I was qualified. I really just wanted to learn enough astrology that I could be intelligent and not shame the bookstore or humiliate myself, frankly. So even learning astrology and being super interested in it, taking 3 or 4 classes a week, different levels. I started a study group that went on for 4 or 5 years with co-students. Like I said, I never intended to be an astrologer. And Mom said to me, you should teach your first class. You should teach a class, just the archetypes. It'll be simple. It'll be easy. It'll be a piece of cake. You can do it. It's not a problem. I'm like, no, Mom. Not going to do it. She'd always be in my ear, you know, it would be really, I think you can do it. And I'd be like, oh, all right, fine, Mom. So I taught my first class. It was a failure, Mychal. And the reason I can tell you it was a failure, and not just from my internal narrative that was awful, I invited a friend who was not in the class, who knew astrology. And I said, would you please come in and sit in the class? And after the class is done, the first class, just give me feedback. I would like to, you know, I want to grow and evolve in this. And so she was really good and told me it was awful. And then she told me why it was awful, which was really good. So she said, well, here's why it was bad, and here's how you can correct that. And that's what I did. It was really, she was encouraging me to find my own authentic voice and not just rely on quoting authors and teachers I'd had, not to just say Jeffrey said this and Maggie said that, or so-and-so said this, but to tell people what I thought. So that was really good feedback. So I started teaching, but still never intended to be a professional consulting astrologer. I'd done a lot of psychic fairs at the bookstore, and I had really just intended to be the manager of the bookstore. Long story short, my younger brother, who I love dearly, we had at that time a lot of sibling rivalry kind of qualities, and he came back from college or wherever he was and came back to the bookstore, and he said, I want to be the manager now. And I'm like, well, you can't, because that's what I'm doing. I have 2 children and a husband, and I got to feed people, and you know, I need this. And that went on for a while. And over the course of that time, I would get in my car and go to work, and consistently, probably 3 or 4 times a week, somebody would try to run me off the road, literally move into my lane, pushing me out, whether it was on the freeway, whether it was on a side street or an arterial. Somebody was moving into my lane, pushing me out of the way. It was so, I mean, it took time for me to see what the universe was telling me was, you Taurus moon, Taurus on the midheaven, I know you want to go this way, but we really want you to go this way. So my brother was the agent of that. I am forever grateful. I let go of the bookstore and gave that over to him to manage. And my mother struck a deal with me, and she said, Jupiter on my sun, she said, if somebody comes into the bookstore to ask for a reading and they don't ask for me specifically, then you will have the reading and we'll build your clientele. Back then, we didn't have social media, obviously. This is back in the late 80s. Social media, none of that. So, you know, you mailed things, you literally put things in the mail to people if you wanted to reach out to them. So, you know, having the bookstore as a resource where people were coming in all the time looking for astrology, that was tremendous. I was incredibly blessed by my mother and by the circumstances. And so life just pushed me in that direction. And she said, okay, on top of that, I'll split NORWAC with you, the Northwest Astrological Conference. You'll become my partner and we'll work together. And then she split the bookstore and gave half of that to my brother. So I became her partner in that, and we built NORWAC to be what it is today. And like, I've always called myself the reluctant astrologer, because it was not the path I chose, but the path that chose me. It was literally running me off the road to pay attention.
That's an amazing story, Laura. And I met your brother at UAC in 2018, and it hadn't occurred to me that, you know, Greg Nalbandian and Laura Nalbandian were related. And I'm not sure why that connection didn't happen, but he was a lovely person, and
Yes.
the bookstore that was there at the fair, it was really a wonderful treat to be able to be there, because like I said, that was my first uh, astrology conference, and being there and really being in a space just surrounded by astrology books was really, it felt like almost a religious experience. So I can only imagine what that would have been like back in the 80s when the bookstore was just coming about and really being a touchstone of astrology in the lives of people at that time.
It really was. And we've had people throughout the years tell us they wandered in as teenagers looking for answers or looking for something, and started them on a path in life. You know, I've had one story. Our bookstore was on what was called the Ave. It's the University Way, because the University of Washington was just down the street. So lots of young people all the time wandering up and down this street that had lots of shops and restaurants and tchotchke shops and all kinds of very interesting things. And there was always a kid on the corner on one of the main streets, or another person handing out pamphlets for Scientology, you know, to do a personality test. And one day this kid comes into the bookstore, this young man, and he confronts me and is quite distraught. He's quite angry, and I'm there to listen. And I said, what seems to be the trouble? And he said, this bookstore is doing a tremendous disservice to people in the world. And I'm like, how so? And he said, you're creating too much confusion. There's too many possibilities. There should just be one answer. There should just be one way of perceiving the world. And I said to him, look, you found your way. I am stoked that you have found something that answers those questions for you, that gives life meaning. That's amazing. But there are so many people out there who have yet to find what speaks to them. And we serve the purpose for them to explore and to find what speaks to them. And he wandered out. And then about 3 months later, he came in to the bookstore again and to ask me if I would recommend some books to him on spirituality and metaphysics. So it was a place where people could come and speak and hear, and we had amazing debates on astrology and psychology and philosophy with, like I said, amazing people, the people that worked in the bookstore, Jeffrey, my mom, our tarot reader, Shar, and then people just wander in and join in the conversation. You could go grab a resource book off the shelf and say, so-and-so did say this. It was amazing. It was a quite idyllic kind of dynamic. And as I said, and I've always said, I was incredibly blessed, and I am incredibly blessed by the labor and gifts of my mother and those who have come before me.
That's a beautiful story, Laura. And at the center of all of it, what it sounds like is that you have really held this space of bringing people together within the entirety of your astrological profession, essentially. And NORWAC and these astrology conferences that you host and are a part of seem to be an extension of that.
They very much are, Mychal, very much are. My mother, she always participated in the astrological community. She was an activist in more ways than one. She would go to conferences, advocating for education, advocating for educational standards in astrology. That's what started her on the path to creating Kepler College. She and I started that in 1992, bringing people together. And then, other people took it over and took it forward, which was exactly what she wanted them to do. She was on the board of the local astrological association, as I am now. And she was always about bringing people together. And NORWAC was specifically created so that she wanted to have more control over the dynamics of the intention of the conference, instead of doing something for the local organization, doing something that she could put her full stamp on, which was about connection. And so she wanted to create an environment that would feel like family, that would feel like a gathering of, not only just a gathering of kindred minds, but people who would feel welcome, that they could, Mom would always wander around the conference, finding people and saying, have you met so-and-so? And, bring somebody over to a group of people that were talking, and then she'd introduce them. And she created an environment where NORWAC had 5 meals during the conference. And when we get back to in-person conferences, we will continue forward with that, because food and conversation creates connection, right? The speakers are there, and you can sit down and have dinner with Lynn Bell, or lunch with Rick Levine, or whoever might be there. And it's an environment that feels welcoming. And that doesn't mean that everybody joins in, because some people just don't. It's not their jam. It's not their groove. That's just who they are. But we create a container energetically, specifically an energetic container for people to feel held in that space. That's what we do.
Beautiful, Laura. And as you've gone on to host more conferences over the years, and after you yourself have taken over NORWAC from your mother, essentially, what are some of the differences that you find in terms of NORWAC, the conference experience now versus NORWAC 20 years ago?
Oh, I think there's a lot of differences. One is I specifically, with my mother's encouragement, started bringing in younger and younger speakers. We agreed that we would have a 50-50 split minimum of male to female speakers. Those female speakers would also have equal place in our keynotes. We always had 8 keynotes, so there were 4 spots for women and 4 spots for men. We had workshops. Those were evenly split. Sometimes it would go over. I remember one year not too long ago where almost all the evening keynotes were women. And that was intentional. But bringing in younger and younger speakers, giving them a chance to build a foundation for their lecturing, to be able to say they have NORWAC under their belt. It's a credential. Chris Brennan started lecturing at NORWAC. There's a lot of speakers that started lecturing at NORWAC. And then probably about 6 years ago, this would be before Twitter and other social medias, but Facebook was there. I was confronted by a group of astrologers of color as the face of all astrology conferences, which I wasn't, but they used an image of the ESAR speaker lineup and then put my name on it, that I was the coordinator. So it didn't matter. The point was they were making a good, valid point. Where are the lecturers of color? Where are they? And so we had always attempted as best we could. We've had people like Mychal Gibson, James Coleman, Basil Farrington. These are all astrologers of color. And I was frustrated and not being able to find more women of color to speak. And so I have to tell you, it was a traumatic and necessary traumatic situation, experience that I had with Facebook and this group. I won't go into the details, but suffice to say that it was a catalyst for me to move. It had always been in my mind, and I had done a minor amount toward it, but not enough. And so it was the catalyst, a difficult catalyst, necessary difficult catalyst to move me forward. I called my friend Nicholas Polomonakos and said, this is what I want to do. How can I do this? I've already searched for astrologers of color and come up with nothing. And so he said, well, why don't I introduce you to Sam Reynolds, who I had not really, officially met or had conversations with. And he and I teamed up. We both agreed, obviously, that something needed to change in the astrological community at this level. And so we created the NORWAC Diversity Scholarship. And then from that built and drew some of our speakers from the diversity candidates as they matured in their process. There are a lot of great and wonderful astrologers that started out as diversity scholarship recipients for NORWAC. I try not to make a big deal of it. My intention from the beginning was to normalize, because it is and should be normal, that it should be a diverse dynamic. So we have a diversity of gender, we have a diversity of topic, we have a diversity of age, we have a diversity of ethnicity. So our whole intention is to move in that direction and continue in that direction and to evolve it and make sure that we have diversity of topic as well as diversity in all levels.
I think that's so special, Laura, especially because the last 2 years has really brought up for so many of us within different communities, different spiritual or metaphysical communities, the need for representation and the need for people to be seen and the need for people who haven't necessarily had the sort of platforms that NORWAC provides to be able to stand on those platforms and essentially get their voice into the world on their own merit. So, I mean, it doesn't necessarily guarantee that every single person who utilizes that platform is going to be amazing or brilliant. But I think that what is special about it is that it gives people the ability to at least have the opportunity to have their voices heard.
Absolutely. I mean, Diana Rose Harper last year did one lecture and her career went absolutely through the roof. Bear River also just with one lecture. And two things happened. Well, I think the primary thing happened was it was the right time and the right moment for particularly these two voices. They couldn't have done it without the quality of their work and the quality of their voice, regardless of gender, ethnicity, whatever. The quality of your work and the quality of your voice and passion has to come through. And it did for these two. And it really did take off for them.
That for me is really the most important thing, especially now within the astrological community where so many people are speaking about diversity and inclusion, that the opportunities that are being given are, yes, being given on the basis of it being fair, that we're all receiving the equal opportunities, but also that it's the quality of the work that really goes ahead of the astrologer and not just the fact that they're Black or not just the fact that they're queer or whatever the case is, but that it's actually that the world is seeing the spark of greatness within the work of the astrologers in question, and that that's what's being amplified, as well as mobilizing a platform for them that they probably would not have had access to 10 years ago.
Oh, for sure, for sure. And last year was what I call a perfect positive storm for NORWAC. In January of last year, we were pre-pandemic, pre-COVID. The in-person conference was sold out. We only had room for 500 people. It was sold out in January, sold out faster than it ever had. And by, mid-February, late February, we knew something was coming down, and I was starting a conversation with the hotel, and they were telling me to wait. And I knew I had a deadline with the hotel, a financial fiscal deadline, that if I didn't make a decision by March 24th or 26th last year, the fee to the hotel would have gone up to $60,000 from 20 for a cancellation. If I had waited and taken the risk, the what's called force majeure in a contract is that the forces of nature have forced the situation by either rule of law or by Mother Nature to stop us from having the conference. If I had waited, the state and county that I live in and the conference is held in wouldn't have allowed that conference to take place anyway. But I couldn't wait, and I didn't want to risk $40,000 more on the line in case. We didn't know. It was early March last year. We didn't even know where this thing was going. So I did negotiate a fee with the hotel. We lost about 150 people almost right off the bat when we went to virtual. And then it just exploded in April and May, and went from 350 people that we were at by that point up to 900. And it was quite shocking. I think, as I said, I think it was a perfect storm, a perfect positive storm, because we were the first major conference. There were some smaller conferences. The vibrational conference went virtual. OPA's retreat went virtual in April, but theirs was both of those were going to be small anyway. This is the first large multi-tracked event that was happening that was going virtual. And I just think it just happened at the time that everybody just jumped on it. And the buzz was happening. And we're doing fine now, but we certainly don't have that number of registrations. And that's fine. Whatever we have for NORWAC is going to be great. But we encourage everyone to go over to www.norwac.net and take a look at the schedule. You're going to find some amazing speakers there. And of course, they'll all be video recorded, and all attendees will have access, a minimum, I'm saying a minimum at this point, a minimum of 2 weeks after post-conference. You will have those 2 weeks to watch as many of the lectures of the days you purchase. So if you purchase the full event, there are 56 lectures, you'll have 2 additional weeks to watch as many of those as you can. If you buy just Saturday, then you would have 2 weeks to watch all of the lectures on Saturday. And then there are pre and post conference events that people can add to their registration, or they can buy those independently and not attend the conference. I was concerned, let me put it this way. I was concerned last year moving from an in-person conference to a virtual conference, obviously never having done it before. And my concern was that the special quality, the je ne sais quoi, what we don't know, that quality of connective tissue that NORWAC provides, I was not sure we could convert that virtually. But we did everything the same that we normally do. We open an intentional circle at the beginning of the conference. It's all family run. My daughter, my son, my brother, myself, people that are close to the family work at the conference. My grandchildren are usually at the conference. They won't be here for the virtual conference. That would be too distracting. But it creates that kind of family dynamic. There's a familiarity, and we carried it off last year. Transiting Jupiter conjunct my son. So it was mom's Jupiter return. Since her death, her passing, this is her first Jupiter return after, and then it conjuncted my son. And it was, like I said, just a perfect positive storm last year for that to occur. So I'm sure that we can create the same environment and more at this coming NORWAC.
As I hear you speaking about this transition of NORWAC from an in-person event to an online event, I hear an excitement in your voice, and I dare say it has something to do with some of the possibilities that moving online provides to NORWAC. What do you think some of those possibilities are now that NORWAC is no longer an in-person event in this moment or in these times while we're still figuring out the shape of moving forward in relation to COVID. But what do you think are some of those possibilities that are now available to NORWAC now that we're doing things virtually?
Well, there's a couple of things. One, of course, if you travel to NORWAC within the United States, you've got a plane ticket, you've got a minimum of 3 nights of hotel, and you've got food, and then you've got the conference. If you're a professional astrologer or you work for somebody else, you're taking vacation time. If you don't get vacation pay, then you're losing pay. So there's a lot of cost involved that we truly recognize, and that's why we've always kept NORWAC relatively inexpensive for people to attend. So you don't have airfare, and the last in-person conference was 2019, and we have people from all over the world. We have people flying in from Australia, New Zealand, Europe, and the cost of that is enormous. But they were willing to take it because NORWAC is a lot of these folks, their favorite conference, because it's just big enough to meet new people, 500 caps out at 500, but it's small enough where you can have a sense of intimacy and connection. And so it's like a reunion. Friends come back and reconnect with one another. And I think we can still provide that. And we did last year for the virtual conference. But again, people who are financially unable to attend a person in conference, conference in person, obviously has just the fee for the conference itself. Someone who has some level of disability that makes it difficult for them to move about and makes it difficult for them to travel. Maybe those who have fear of traveling or flying, those who might have, and I've heard from folks who have fear of being in crowds, regardless of a pandemic, they just felt uncomfortable being, shy and too reserved, and it seemed too overwhelming. For them, they can go in and out of these virtual astrology rooms at will and gather what they want. So I think those are the distinct differences. The downside would be, just the diminished human to human contact. We always had the bookstore at the conference. You walk into the bookstore and tangibly pick up a book and look at it before you buy it. There were other vendors, but I think that, it certainly has opened the door for more people to attend than obviously an in-person conference could ever do. So to me, that's the biggest difference. We are going to go back to in-person conferences. How we will, or if we will, combine a hybrid, I'm not sure how that will work. I have given it a lot of consideration and have not come up with a full decision yet. I think that if we do, it may not be live streamed. It may just be all recorded. People will be there in person. We will video record, and then somebody could purchase the conference at the conference rate and then sit in the luxury of their home and have a certain amount of time to watch those videos. And I think at that point, then we would also give the attendees the same benefit that when they leave the conference, they would have access to the other videos. I think that's going to change if we do some kind of hybrid dynamic so that other people can attend. And besides, we only have room for 500. So, and 500 is a good number. I'm happy with 500, trust me. But, for those who sat on waiting lists for 2 years, waiting lists at those 2 conferences where they sold out, this gives them the chance to not miss it.
Laura, for you, what is the purpose or the role of an astrological conference in relation to our community?
Well, it's multifold, truly. One is education, of course, continuing education. But I have to say that's actually, for me, not the top of the list. I think that it is connection and community. I think connection drives humans. And during this pandemic, our connection has been severed in many ways from one another. So it has brought home even more to me how important in-person exchange of ideas and connection is. And I feel that when people feel welcome, connected, when they feel they belong somewhere, they're carrying on conversations with people that share their same language, their same goals in terms of the study of astrology, then the absorption of that information is multifold, in that it's absorbed better, more when you're laughing and connecting, and you're talking to somebody you just met, and oh, you went to that lecture, what did you think about that? Or I heard so and so in this lecture and they said this, this, and this, let's look at our charts and see what that means. So that then in real time, putting into practice some of the things they're learning right away in those lectures. So there's, we're a clan, the clan of astrologers. And within that larger clan, there are smaller clans that come together, that are based on methodology and technique. But the beauty of a conference is where you have this sort of smorgasbord of ideas and a smorgasbord that you can choose from. Even if you're a traditional astrologer, you might wander into a psychologically based lecture and be able to take from that and meld that into your practice. Or let's say you're an evolutionary astrologer that listens to a lecture on profections and finding a way to take profections in some way and bring it back into your practice. It allows for you to taste, touch, feel, see, learn new ideas and new ways that if you've had one teacher with one methodology, which is fine and fabulous, this broadens your scope.
I think that theme about connection and community is really one of the things that I enjoyed the most in terms of being at UAC. And I missed NORWAC the last time it was held in person. But as I've looked at the legacy of astrological conferences, it seems to be this concept of community and connection that is the lifeblood of these conferences, because I see world famous astrologers having a drink in the lounge and just sitting down and talking with each other, and there's so much joy attached to the conference experience that it's something that I truly look forward to being a part of again in person. But I'm so grateful to be able to participate in it in this virtual way.
We're grateful to have you for sure. And again, fresh voices. And that's the thing, ever since the diversity conference, bringing in and sponsoring younger people on many different levels of diversity has created an environment where young people want to participate, because historically speaking, conferences have been attended by older white people who've had money, right? And so that's just the truth of it. That's not, I'm not slamming that in any way. It's just stating what has been. And so what is occurring and what has occurred in the last 6 years for NORWAC is that has completely flipped. We're seeing much larger numbers of younger and younger folk feeling like they have a place, feeling like that their speakers reflect them by age, by ethnicity, by dynamic, whatever those gender fluidity, whatever it might be, they're being reflected in the faculty of the conference, so they feel more seen, welcome. It's a place for them.
Now, there's something really interesting that you just mentioned, Laura, and it's this word faculty in relation to the conference. And earlier you spoke about tracks within the conference. So for the person who has not been to an astrology conference before, and this upcoming NORWAC in May is going to be their first astrology conference. What is a track?
Well, there's two. NORWAC has, okay, let me step back. There are two different types of conferences, sort of overall. One's called a breakout conference and one's called a plenary conference. These are organizational terms, right, that coordinators use. A plenary is where everybody's in one room listening to the same person speak, right? Everybody's together. A breakout is where everybody goes into different rooms. Obviously, it's pretty self-explanatory. NORWAC does a combination. We do, normally astrology conferences might do 1 or 2 plenary events, 1 or 2 keynote lectures where everybody's in the same room. NORWAC does 8. We do 8 plenary or keynote where everybody comes to the room together, and then we split apart and go into different rooms to come back together and then split apart. So in a conference like UAC, United Astrology Conference, it had 15 breakouts, 15 tracks, and broken down into topics so that if somebody wanted to do solely a Vedic track, then they would go to all of the lectures in that track, right? NORWAC doesn't have tracks per se. We don't have labeled tracks of topics. So it truly is kind of the smorgasbord, this feast, if you will, of tasting and testing of different components of astrology. What I try to do, obviously, in the coordinating of and designing of the conference itself, is to make sure that during the breakout, which we have 6 lectures going on at once, that those 6 lectures aren't competing with one another in some way. They will always compete. There are people who are like, how do I choose between these 6? Because they're all fascinating, but they've all got to be somewhat different. I can't, I try to keep the traditional people kind of broken apart and the EA people broken apart. And so it's, trying to mix and match is a very challenging endeavor, but much easier to do at NORWAC than it was at UAC, doing, 5 days and 15 tracks. And we went to Chicago, and my team, I made these big, huge grids with the lecture times, and I had Post-its for each one, so you could mix and match and move things around. And oh my God, we've got the same person speaking on the same day. Can't have that. It's a challenge, but it's also fascinating. So NORWAC doesn't have the traditional tracks in the sense that they aren't labeled as such, but they are breakouts where you can you would choose a lecture. Obviously, you can't attend all 6 at once. However, just like an in-person conference, if you get into a room, virtual or otherwise, and you realize, hey, I don't really get this. I thought this was going to be interesting to me or germane to the thing I'm studying, but it's not. I'm going to duck out and go to another one. So you can go in and out of rooms at NORWAC. You can do that at the in-person conference. You can do that at the virtual conference. It's actually easier to do at the virtual conference. It's not as disrupting.
So, Laura, once again, for the beginner coming into the conference experience for the first time, you have had 2 years now to host these virtual conferences. What do you think is going to be special about this NORWAC this year that people who've never been to a conference before should definitely be looking forward to in NORWAC 2021?
Well, first I would say that this is the first year where we've actually labeled each lecture. I've forced the speakers to determine, is this a beginning, intermediate, or advanced, right? And not just beginner for the technique, but is also the technique a beginner technique? So it gives the new person to astrology a better sense of what they're getting when they get into the lecture. And I think that I would encourage everyone, not only the new folks that come to the conference, we will have social meeting gathering places during the breaks. There'll be 45-minute breaks. We made them longer this year so people could have more time to engage. So we'll have rooms that people can go into and converse. After lectures, speakers will go into those rooms. They really loved that last year. The speakers loved it and the attendees loved it. So when they come into a big room, We figured out how to create breakout rooms for each of the speakers, and then the attendees can select a breakout room for the speaker and go carry on the conversation from the lecture or ask additional questions. Those, of course, won't be recorded, but and then, of course, just going into one of the social rooms and introducing yourself. We'll have folks sitting in there from NORWAC to help you navigate and meet with folks and connect. And then hopefully we'll get AFAN or one of the other groups to do a social evening kind of thing where people can go and, mix themselves a drink, a beer or a sparkling water and hang out with friends. Because at NORWAC or any other conference, where do you go? You go to the lounge, right?
Most definitely. Most definitely. Now, Laura, for people who are wanting to register for NORWAC 2021 and plug into all of the goodness that you have planned for us this May, where can we find out more information about NORWAC and how can we sign up now?
You can sign up right now. This very minute, you can go to www.norwac.net. The register button is in the upper right corner. You would create yourself a profile, because once you have your profile, your login name, and your password you create, you'll be able to access the virtual conference using that password, a login and password. You'll find the schedule. You'll find the list of speakers. You'll find an audio store. So all of that is there. There's a scholarship application button on the nav bar, though we will be selecting our candidates and recipients for those scholarships very soon. So be aware of that. And yeah, you can register right now. And there's a fabulous audio sale going on right now. My daughter is now handling the audio, and she's created a new moon sale. So anything to do with the moon, lunar eclipses, and all of that, is on sale at norwac.net.
Well, thank you so much for that, Laura. I'm going to put all that information down below in the description box so that our listeners and viewers can go over to NORWAC and sign up today for this amazing conference, and also grab themselves some lunar goodness over at the audio store. So, Laura, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to be here with me this evening. I truly appreciate it, and I cannot wait to join you at NORWAC 2021.
Thank you.
And to our listeners and viewers out there, if this is your first time joining us here on the Oraculos podcast, or if this is your 100th time joining us, I just want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart for continuing to come and share in this virtual astrological space with us. I receive your love, your support, your feedback, but most importantly, I receive your encouragement. So if you want to continue to be a part of the magic and the momentum that we're building here on the Oraculos podcast, please do, go below and like this amazing video, as well as subscribe to the Oraculos podcast wherever you find us on the internet, and always share this amazing interview with your other astrologically and magically minded friends, because more and more people around the world need to hear from these amazing astrologers like Laura Nalbandian, and they need to attend amazing events like NORWAC 2021. So until next time, I'm your host, Mychal A. Bryan, leaving you in love and peace and hope. Until we meet again, have a good one. Bye-bye. Laura Nalbandian.
Mychal A. Bryan, thank you.